All right. Looks like the microphone's working and the bird has cleared the area, so we should be in good shape. Let's see. The only other trick is getting the output here. Is there anyone here from IT that can help? There seems to be a display issue all of a sudden. Well, I guess I technically am. Unfortunately, I don't work here at the MGM. They haven't quite gotten up with the RFID technology for their presentations yet, at least. Oh, I think we're good. Perfect. All right, problem solved. See, Patrick has become our new IT support here.
There you go.
So, all right. So we talked a little bit before Daniel about numbers in terms of all kinds of things, including numbers of different ways to evaluate software and types of software. Then we got into Daniel's section, which really was about the numbers. And in this section, we've had enough math, so we're going to keep the numbers to a minute. Or we'll still be one or so towards the beginning, but other than that, what we wanted to do in this section was talk about how to support an RFID infrastructure. What we found is, as people implement, what typically the life cycle tends to be is they come up with their use case, they create their costs, and they say, all right, let's do a pilot. They do a pilot, hopefully it works out well, and if it does work out well, they say, hooray, we're going to move it to 40 sites, 60 sites, 80 sites, whatever it might be. And sure enough, they now have a problem on their hands that they've never had in the IT world before. They have to support an infrastructure out there that's unlike anything they're supporting out at the edge. So what we want to talk about in this section is the challenge that is moving into production and creating a supportable infrastructure, because it really is the challenge of real RFID. And it's something that's very new because, quite honestly, during the mandate days, there weren't a lot of folks who were doing full-scale production rollouts, but now that people are using RFID for value, it's something that's absolutely critical. So what we want to do is cover three basic things. The first is what goes wrong in the RFID infrastructure and how do I detect and resolve it? How do I fix it? The second is, of course, detecting and resolving, and then the third is, all right, well, I've detected, I'm resolving it, but how do I reduce my support costs? Because you know what, if I'm going to manually support all of these things, you're going to find that those numbers that Daniel flashed up are going to be eclipsed immediately by things like travel costs and on-site repair costs. And a lot of times there are unnecessary travel costs and on-site repair costs, so let's try to prevent those and reduce those. So to start with a number, we'll go with, there's three basic types of things that you're going to have. And events can be categorized into three basic things. There's things that are scheduled, and in the RFID world, this is primarily firmware. So all of the hardware vendors, they come out with firmware patches very frequently. And depending on how leading edge you want to be, the more firmware revs you're going to hit. So for example, we've just completed a pilot project with a medical devices company using high memory tags. And if you try to use high memory tags, so these are tags that have the normal EPC that are either 96 or 240 bits, and they have some extra memory. In this case, they were 512-bit tags. Well, according to the EPC spec, that function has to be supported. And sure enough, it is technically supported by all of the vendors. But if you actually try to hook up software or read tags, you know what? It doesn't work. And the vendor's tools don't work, and there's bugs through the firmware, and you have to do all sorts of crazy things to the system to read these tags. So if you're pushing the edge and you're constantly doing new things like that, you're going to be on firmware rev somewhere between 4 and 6 times a year, which is pretty high. Now, if you've got a very stable platform, you say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to try to be on the edge and dealing with all sorts of crazy new stuff out there. I have a very basic use case. Perhaps I'm reading 96-bit tags. I'm reading them in conveyors, and I just want to get them to my backend system. You know what? If you really want to, you can get away with the same firmware that was around for 2 years ago. But it's probably a good idea for security reasons and other reasons to do at least biannually or annual updates to something that's supported with your software stack. So there's scheduled predetermined maintenance that I have. The second piece are detected events. These are the ones that you want to put into place, because otherwise you're going to get to third, which is requested events, and those tend to be the most costly. Detected is something like, hey, my software says my reader's down, or my software says the network's down, or whatever it might be. We're going to get into some of the problems with detecting and how we can improve detecting. And then the third is some sort of requested thing. And it might be requested maintenance, like, hey, can you move this antenna around so I can get better read performance? Or it may be what most of the support calls are. Someone calls up, help desk answers, it's RFID. What's RFID? Well, I guess there's a phone number I can call. Well, what's wrong with your RFID? Well, it doesn't work. And, well, then you have a very expensive cycle trying to figure out with your very expensive staff who are supporting the RFID, what is the problem? How am I going to resolve it? So the first thing to do is to take a look at the different levels that you want to set up and create a participation model between the different parts of your organization and your vendors and potentially third-party support organizations. So what I've done is I've broken down the support into a number of levels, and we'll go next into a sample escalation flow. So at the very basic, I call it sort of a non-support level. There's maintenance events. We call that level N. The next level is what can happen on-site without having to call anyone. So these are things that someone says, hey, you know what? The red light is off, and I know when the red light's off, I hit this button and it resets the reader. Now, it's not necessarily the most elegant of solutions, but it sure is cheap, and it's a quick way to get certain things up and running, particularly if it's not a mission-critical kind of application. The other thing is you can have automated correction. So we've deployed systems at Odin where you have dozens or hundreds of readers on a site, and if a reader goes down or someone changes the configuration, the other readers automatically detect that configuration change and update it, so that way the reader is operating properly with the correct configurations, correct performance. And it can automatically detect if you have declining read rates because of things like humidity or sheet metal in the area, that kind of thing. So then you start to get into the part where you never really want to go, but unfortunately you're going to have to go. So there's some sort of help desk that hopefully is RFID trained. A lot of times in very large organizations, the help desk is general service. So you always call, 4444 or whatever the extension is of the large organization. Help desk receives a call and they field it and then send it off onto an RFID team to figure out what's actually wrong. You may be able to script a few things here and say, all right, have them ask 3 questions. Are the lights on? Are all of your readers down? Or is one of your readers down? But you're going to come up with some sort of minimal level of steps to get to the next level, which is you have your hardware guys and your software guys who then get to duke it out. Because what's going to very quickly happen, particularly if you escalate straight to vendors, is you're going to get the good old finger pointing. So the hardware guys will say, no, our hardware is working great. It's software guys. And us software guys, of course, are going to say, well, it's not reading. So it must be a hardware problem.